By that hour, the station had already thinned into something skeletal, all function with no witness left to justify it. Billet boards kept changing by reflex, spilling pale rows of departures across the glass while the empty seats beneath them reflected the ceiling lights in dull, tired lines. Rain had passed an hour earlier and left a damp mineral smell in the air that drifted in each time the outer doors failed to seal properly. Somewhere along the concourse, a vending machine hummed with the stubborn certainty of a machine that had outlived the purpose of comfort, and every few seconds there came the tiny metal click of cooling rails from beyond the platform edge, as if the station were still adjusting itself after a train no one now remembered seeing. The attendant on duty had been alone long enough for the camera feeds to begin feeling more reliable than his own eyes. He had spent most of the shift glancing between Platform 4, the main footbridge, the entrance barriers, and the black tunneled track beyond the signal lights, not because anything had happened there, but because nothing had. Emptiness at that time of night ought to have looked temporary. It ought to have implied an arrival, a delay, a final rush of footsteps before first light. Instead, the station felt paused in a way that made the posted timetable seem decorative, as though the boards were continuing on behalf of a service that had quietly stopped meaning anything. At 2:13, the announcement played. It began with the standard electronic chime, a sound so ordinary he nearly ignored it. Then a burst of station hiss and low static that made him look up from the logbook. The voice that followed was flattened by age or interference, neither male nor female in any settled way, and it announced the arrival of a service to a destination he did not recognize. What struck him first was not the place name itself, but the cadence, the measured confidence with which the voice delivered it, as though the route had always existed and he had simply failed to notice it. Then came the platform number, Platform 4, on time. He waited for the correction to follow. He expected another announcement, a dispatcher's override, some muffled apology for a test signal or cost feed. None came. The station returned to its old mechanical silence, yet the silence had altered. It now contained the aftershape of the voice, a vacancy in the air where language had passed and left something behind. When he checked the board above the concourse, nothing had changed. No additional service. No special entry, only the same late departures and cancellations, flickering in their habitual amber rows. But out beyond the glass, at the far end of Platform 4, the darkness looked denser than it had a minute before, as if a train-sized space had been set aside inside it. He told himself there were simple reasons: software fault, recorded debris in the public address system, an old routing file waking by accident. The station was older than its upgrades, and old places stored errors the way walls stored damp. He rose, took the radio from the desk, and walked the concourse under the strip lights, hearing his own steps arrive back to him from far-off surfaces. In the window panes, his reflection drifted beside him in fragmented pieces: shoulder, face, dark tie, white station lights slicing through his body whenever he passed a frame. Each automatic door opened a fraction too late, as if unsure he still counted as a passenger-facing problem. Platform 4 lay under a washed yellow glow that made every stain in the concrete seem deliberate. Benches stood empty with rain drying in crescents on the seats. The digital clock on the opposite wall still showed 2014, the red numbers unwavering. But beneath them, the air had a peculiar pressure to it, thin and metallic, like the moment before a train enters a station at speed. He listened for vibration in the rails and heard none. He looked down the track and saw only the ordinary geometry of distance: signal post, fencing, a scatter of wet reflections, and, farther on, a wedge of darkness where the line curved out of sight. Yet he could not shake the impression that something had just passed the bend and stopped without lights. He crouched near the edge and saw, below the platform lip, a line of moisture trembling on the steel, not shaking, not fully still. The movement was so slight it could have belonged to wind, except there was no wind. It gathered and released in a rhythm too slow to call mechanical, too regular to call natural. He stepped back, suddenly aware that he had leaned closer than he meant to, and looked along the whole length of the platform for another person, some witness to restore proportion. There was no one. Even the usual drifters of late travel, the smokers sheltering under canopies, the hunched figures staring into their phones as if warmth could be generated by blue light, had vanished. The station had become not empty, but evacuated. When he returned inside, the CCTV monitor for Platform 4 showed a frame of the platform exactly as he had left it, but the timestamp in the corner lagged by 43 seconds. He blinked and checked the next camera. The concourse feed was current, the stairwell was current, the ticket hall was current. Only Platform 4 was behind, quietly replaying the recent past at a delay precise enough to seem intentional. He watched his own figure enter the frame from the left, walk to the edge, crouch, and stand again. Then the delayed image of himself stopped moving. The real platform outside remained empty. On the monitor, however, his recorded body had turned toward the far end of the platform and gone still, as if it had noticed someone standing just off camera. He leaned closer. Compression noise crawled through the image, a soft grain swimming over the bright parts of the frame. The stopped figure on the monitor remained at the edge of Platform 4, but not quite in the same posture he remembered. The shoulders were more level. The head seemed slightly tilted. It looked less like a man pausing to listen and more like a man listening because he had been addressed. Then the image juddered and advanced, only not to the expected next moment. The platform was now empty again, though the timestamp had progressed by only 1 second. He scrubbed through the feed, found the same gap, and found nothing else. No entering figure, no departing figure, no train. At 27:17, the announcement played a second time. This time, the chime sounded farther away, as though the speakers above him had not produced it directly, but had repeated a sound first made deeper in the building. The same destination, the same platform, on time. He reached for the radio, called the control room, and heard only static granular enough to resemble breathing. Not speech. Not interference in any recognizable pattern. Just a dry inhaling texture that seemed to come and go depending on how still he held himself. When he lowered the radio, the station around him appeared to do the same, every background sound retreating at once. The vending machine hum died. The fluorescent buzz flattened. Even the rainwater tapping in a distant gutter ceased, leaving the building in a silence so complete he could hear the minute friction of his sleeve against the desk. Then, somewhere out on Platform 4, there came the faintest sound of footsteps. Not walking. Not approaching in any human sense. They arrived in isolated impacts, each one soft and deliberate, with too much space between them for an ordinary pace, as if something were learning how to cross a platform by steadying the memory of people rather than their bodies. He could not tell from which ends they came. The acoustics of the station had changed. Distances no longer behaved. A sound from the tunnel might emerge beside the ticket barriers, and the scrape of a sign chain in the concourse might seem to drift up from the tracks. He stood at the desk and waited for the footsteps to resolve into a figure. None appeared. At 2:20, a commuter entered through the main doors. The man looked unremarkable enough that, for several seconds, relief did what reason could not. Damn coat. Ordinary shoes. No luggage beyond a folded umbrella hooked over one wrist. His face was pale from the cold or from fluorescent light, and his eyes seemed unfocused in the way of someone awake, too late for too many nights in a row. He did not glance at the boards or ticket gates. He did not ask a question. He simply crossed the concourse with a calm, economical stride and turned toward Platform 4, as if the announcement had been meant only for him and had reached him at a great distance with perfect clarity. The attendant stepped after him, calling out once before, remembering, with a sudden irrational certainty, that he must not use his voice. The rule presented itself complete and unargued. If he called to the man would stop, and if the man stopped, he would not turn around alone. The thought was so immediate and so final that it seemed less like fear than memory. He kept moving anyway, but quieter now, matching the commuter's path through the station. The man passed beneath one pool of light and then another. In each pool, something about him altered by a degree too small to see directly. His coat seemed older in one frame, wetter in the next. The back of his neck was clean-shaven, then hidden by a collar that had not been raised before. His height changed only in relation to fixed objects, a sign, a bin, the timetable case. Everything was subtle enough to survive denial, and together it made pursuit feel like watching a series of near-identical strangers occupy the same place. On Platform 4, the commuter stopped at the yellow line and faced the dark bend in the track. The attendant remained under the canopy, several yards behind, the cold air pressing through his uniform. The signal beyond the curve should have been red. It had been red all night. Now it glowed with the color that at first resembled amber, then sickly white. then a lightless brightness difficult to compare to any signal at all. It illuminated nothing. Instead, it seemed to remove shadow from selected parts of the platform while leaving the rest untouched, so that the commuter's coat brightened at the shoulder while his legs remained in. Darkness up to the knee. The rails began to hum, very softly, then louder. No headlamps appeared. The commuter tilted his head as though hearing a familiar engine note under all that distortion. The attendant looked from the track to the information board mounted near the waiting room wall. For 1 second, its normal display remained, scheduled services, delayed times, destination codes, then every row cleared. The black screen held. New letters typed themselves across the top line with the slow certainty of an old machine. Service approaching. Do not step back. He stared until the message vanished and the regular timetable returned, unchanged except that one line now showed a service due at 2:13. Still due. No destination listed. Platform 4. On time. He forced himself to look away from the board and saw that the commuter was no longer alone. A second figure stood farther down the platform near the dark. It might have been there before. It might have been a trick of contrast, a human shape assembled from fence posts, advertisement frame, and the black seam where the curve swallowed the track. Yet once seen, it would not return to landscape. It had the vertical patience of a person waiting for permission to become clearer. Then a third figure stood beside it. Then something in between the second and third suggested a fourth presence that the station lighting had not fully accepted. None moved. The commuter near the yellow line made no sign of noticing them, but the angle of his shoulders changed in faint acknowledgement, like a passenger adjusting his stance as the train he has been expecting enters the platform. The hum in the rails thickened into a layered vibration that touched the soles of the attendant's shoes and climbed through his bones. Air displaced itself from the tunnel without producing wind. The smell that came with it was not oil, not brake dust, not rain. It was the smell of enclosed fabric long kept from daylight, mingled with cold iron and the sweet dry scent of old paper, the kind of smell that clung to sealed rooms when open after years. The attendant found himself staring into the curve of track and understanding, with slow, suffocating certainty that whatever approached had not traveled from elsewhere. It had been near all along. It was arriving from a distance folded inside the station itself, from a route that touched ordinary platforms only by mistake or invitation. A shape emerged where a train should have been, but it did not assemble according to any order he knew. Window darkness first, then the idea of carriage sides around it, then brief silver lines where metal ought to catch light, though no light struck them. It advanced soundlessly for several impossible feet, and then, with a roar, as if noise had remembered its duty too late, the platform screens flickered. The clock on the wall lost a minute and gained it back. The commuter at the edge leaned forward with the quiet expectation of someone seeing his ride at last. The attendant could not move. He watched the arriving mass distort the reflections in the waiting room glass so that the station behind him looked deeper, longer, full of corridors and passengers that did not belong to any part of Doncaster he had ever worked in. The train, if train it was, did not stop. It merely became present, occupying the platform in a rush of stale air in impossible stillness, every implied door aligned with the yellow line. In the black windows he saw not seats but interiors too dim and too large, aisle after aisle extending beyond the width of any carriage, lit by intermittent bars of weak overhead light. Figures sat within them, facing forward, all motionless except for the minute synchronized turn of heads that occurs when something new enters a compartment. He understood then that they were not looking at the platform. They were looking past him into the station, as if checking whether it matched a memory they had preserved imperfectly for many years. The commuter stepped across the yellow line. No alarm sounded. No speaker warned him back. He crossed the gap without effort, though the visible floor of the carriage seemed lower than track level and farther away than any train threshold should have been. For one instant he turned sideways and the attendant saw his face in full. It was ordinary. Terribly ordinary, but it carried the expression of someone arriving exactly where he had always been expected, and beneath that calm there lived a depthless fatigue that did not belong to one missed connection or one ruined night. It belonged to repetition, to countless late arrivals answered at last. The doors did not close because they had never visibly opened. The train remained beside the platform, more absence than object, while the waiting figures farther down platform 4 began, one by one, to move toward it. It crossed under the station lights without casting the right shadows. Some appeared in business clothes, some in coats too old for the cut to mean anything current, some as no more than a body shape carrying damp darkness where a face should have resolved. None hurried. The attendant finally found the strength to step backward, and the movement seemed to attract attention from inside the carriages. In several black windows, the seated passengers inclined their heads by the same small degree. Their gaze, though veiled by reflection, had the unmistakable pressure of recognition. The announcement played a third time, but now it came from everywhere at once. Not through speakers, but through the station's metal. Its glass, its rails, its electric bones. The destination name arrived clearer than before and meant nothing. The platform number followed. Then the phrase "on time" stretched and degraded until the last word became a long electrical whine. Every monitor in the concourse switched to black. The red platform clock rolled from 2013 to 2013 again and again. The attendant backed through the waiting room door, hit the wall behind him, and felt the station tilt, not physically, but in the logic by which spaces remain connected. The footbridge outside the glass now seemed to lead somewhere lower than the platform. The ticket hall had become too far away. The train remained impossibly still. When the lights finally steadied, the platform was empty. No train, no commuter, no waiting figures. Only wet concrete, benches, timetable cases, the ordinary red signal beyond the bend, and the pale first hint of morning failing to enter the clouded sky. The information board above the waiting room displayed the regular departures. The CCTV feed for Platform 4 showed an uninterrupted view of vacancy. The timestamp was current. On the desk inside the station, however, the night log lay open to the page where he had been writing, and beneath the neat entries for faults and weather conditions, there appeared a new line in handwriting so close to his own that he needed several seconds to find the differences. Service received at 2:13. One passenger boarded. More expected tomorrow.